Hey friends, it's Robert. Well, pack your bags, we're headed to Korea. In this episode of World Crafted, we'll examine a 2,000-year-old festival with origins as a weaving competition. And then we'll tackle a beautiful DIY, creating a simple weaving to hang in your home. Many countries around the globe celebrate a harvest festival, and Korea is no exception. Here it's known as Chuseok, and it's a major 3-day holiday that begins on the 15th day of the 8th month of the lunar calendar on a full moon. Roughly translated, Chuseok means the great middle of autumn, but in English it's often referred to as Korean Thanksgiving. People travel to their hometown, spend time with family, and honor their ancestors. There are memorial services, large family dinners, and traditional games and dances. Now, what fascinates me is what little we know about the origin of the holiday. During what's known as the Three Kingdoms period in Korea's history, there was a king named Yuri who reigned from 24 to 57 AD, and he is widely credited with beginning Chuseok as a competitive festival. According to popular legend, the women of the kingdom were divided into teams for a period of 1 month, during which time they weaved as much cloth as they could. At the end of the month, the team that made the most cloth was declared the winner and was treated to a feast by the losing team. But there are also many scholars who believe Chuseok may originate from ancient celebrations of the harvest moon. So for today's Chuseok-inspired DIY, we're going to give a respectful nod to both origin stories and create a round, moon-shaped weaving. I love this project because it's a simplified version of weaving that yields beautiful results, and it's a great intro to the craft. We're going to begin with an embroidery hoop as our circular loom. You can create this weaving in any size, but I'm going to demonstrate it on a 9-inch hoop. You'll also need a strong, thin cotton string to create what's known in weaving as the warp, or the framework through which we'll weave our yarn. Start by measuring out about 6 yards of the string and wrap it around a craft stick. This is going to give you a little better control when you're creating the warp. Remove the outer hoop and set it aside. Tie one end of the string to the inner hoop, leaving a tail that's a couple of inches long, and then double knot it. We're going to wrap the string around the hoop to create a warp that looks like the spokes of a bicycle wheel. To do this, wrap the string in a figure 8 configuration. So you go down around the hoop on the side opposite from where you've tied it, take the string through the center of the hoop, back up and around to the opposite side. The reason you make a figure 8 is so that the warp threads meet in the middle. Give yourself about 1 inch between each wrapped interval, and the goal is to end up with an odd number of spokes. This is really important for your weaving to turn out correctly. For the 9-inch hoop, I'm creating 17 spokes. When your loom is looking pretty full, you may want to pause and take a quick count. Now here's the trick to finishing off your warp. You'll have noticed that each spoke is composed of 2 warp strings, with the exception being the first one. When you've created your final spoke, and before you bring the string down to complete that first spoke and tie it off, pause for a second in the center of your wheel and wrap it around the center of the intersecting warp strings. You'll see that this immediately makes the warp look neater and lines up all of the strings, creating the spokes. Wrap your warp string around the middle again at a perpendicular angle to firmly secure it, and then bring it down to create the second string in the first spoke. Tie your string end to the tail of the first spoke and double knot it. Adjust your spokes to make them as even as possible, and then place the outer hoop over the warped loom. It'll help ensure that your warp doesn't slide around. Now, creating your warp can be a little tricky the first time around, but there is no shame in having to remove the string and start over. It just takes a little practice. Now that our warp is prepared, we'll move on to my favorite part, the actual weaving. The yarn that is woven through the warp is called the weft, and here you've got a lot of wonderful options to consider. I recommend having at least one thinner yarn, often referred to as worsted weight, and then a variety of chunky or bulky yarns, and you'll find that these thicker yarns help you complete the project a lot faster. For my color selection, I've taken inspiration from a popular food served during Chuseok, traditional Korean rice cakes. The shape, color, and filling vary according to region, but in Seoul, South Korea, they serve a half-moon-shaped 5-color rice cake. White is plain, brown is cinnamon, pink is berry, green is herb, and yellow is gardenia seed. To begin your weaving, measure out a couple feet of your thinnest yarn and tie one end through the eye of a weaving needle. And I'm actually just using a large plastic sewing needle. Bring the needle up from the underside of the warp, Leave a 2 to 3 inch tail on the underside, and then weave the yarn through 3 or 4 of the spokes in an over and under fashion. It's easiest to weave towards the edge of the loom where the warp strings are further apart, and then using your fingers, push the woven yarn as close to the center point of your warp as possible. Continue weaving to create a center that is roughly 2 inches in diameter, and then finish with the needle on the underside. Tie the 2 ends of the weft yarn together and snip the tails. Now let's move on to a thicker, bulky yarn, which will likely be too large to thread through your weaving needle. So, instead of a needle, take a craft stick, cut a thin notch in one end with your scissors or a craft knife, and then slide the end of your bulky yarn down into that notch. This will keep it nice and secure as you work. When you look at your warp strings, you'll see the over-under pattern that the yarn has created. To incorporate this second style of yarn, identify a spoke where the previous yarn was woven behind it. Bring the thread up from the underside, leaving a few inch long tail, and then weave over this spoke, continuing your over-under pattern. Now remember, it's easiest to weave toward the edge of the loom where the warp strings are further apart. Then use your fingers again to push those woven yarns towards the center. Feel free to switch yarn styles and colors as often as you'd like, weaving your way to the edge of the loom. You can just leave those tails on the underside alone until you've finished weaving your entire piece. Then you can either tie them to the adjacent tails or simply tuck them into the weaving to secure them. When you're finished, you can fuss with the yarn to disguise any openings in your weaving, and don't be afraid to leave some of the warp visible around the edges. I actually think it's kind of pretty. One of the great things about using an embroidery hoop as your weaving loom is that it makes it easy to hang and display on your wall. I do hope you'll give this project a try, experimenting with size, color, and yarn variety, and maybe you'll feel inspired to read up and learn a little bit more about the lovely Korean holiday of Chuseok. Thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't done so already, I want to encourage you to subscribe to Kin Community and join me next time for another world-inspired DIY.